Every single thing that I've done had some disaster built into it. I referenced earlier the corn out of Brewing Company. That was super painful. Like blew up. I walked away from what is now probably a $50 million business because it got so toxic. The whole contract got basically ripped out from under us. We were already fulfilling the contract. It was like $10 million 6-year contract, $10 million a year. And just like when I smacked a tree going 40 miles an hour and shattered my scapula in February and broke 8 ribs and had internal damage. I mean, that's a pretty shitty situation, but it didn't affect my happiness. In fact, I was happier after that. But there was a lot of stuff not so good about that, which impacted me deeply. A lot of alcoholism. There's a lot of verbal, emotional, and even physical abuse. We just took it in stride. It's just the way things were. I heard these shouts coming from this upstairs window, and I stopped and I look up and I was standing under the sign for World Sado Karate Headquarters. I'm like, serendipity, right? And I go up and I see the Grandmaster, Tadashi Nakamura, in the middle of the floor running a class because he was different than anybody I'd ever experienced. He was an enlightened master. Before I even knew what that was, I'm staring at that. And so I said, this is my mentor. So if I stay on that path, I don't like the future I see. And I can visualize that. I visualized the future. I didn't like what I saw. The Navy SEALs were revealed to me. Randomly walking home one night and passing a recruiting office and seeing a poster titled Be Someone Special with really cool imagery of Navy SEALs doing cool shit. Even though I probably would have stayed in New York and gotten my 7th black belt with Nakamura, there would have been positive aspects. So I probably would have made a lot of money. I wouldn't have felt good about myself. And I would have walked away from my calling. When you do align with and start to move toward your calling, then synchronicity happens. Things flow for you. It just becomes effortless and it becomes joyful. And it stops feeling like work. And that's what I experienced when I was shown the Navy SEALs. He said it's extremely hard to get into the SEALs from the civilian world. It may take 1 or 2 people a year. A class of 185 like badasses in my SEAL training class 170, 19 of us graduated. And I was the honor man, #1 graduate, and my other 6 teammates graduated with me that day. There's no such thing as failure, only failure to learn.
Today on No Surrender, I'm honored to be joined by my coach, Mark Devine, a man who transformed a childhood of abuse, alcoholism, and chaos into a life of purpose, clarity, and elite performance. Through martial arts, Zen training, and deep meditation, he discovered that we are not our ego. We're connected to all that is. That truth propelled him from a corporate desk to defying the odds of becoming a SEAL officer, the honor man of his SEAL class, and eventually a SEAL commander. He's also a best-selling author of multiple books, the creator of SEAL Fit, Unbeatable Mind, various modern mental toughness programs, and much more. He's our first official guest, and we packed this episode with so much wisdom that you'll seriously want to take notes. This is No Surrender. This episode is brought to you by our partners over at Don't Trade It In. It's the best and fastest way to get top dollar for your car from the comfort of your home. Please visit don'ttradeitin.com today. We'll start in the beginning. Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
By the way, thanks, Justin. I appreciate you having me here and help kick off this new project of yours, No Surrender. It's going to be a huge success. I'm from a small town in upstate New York. The original town I spent my first 6 years, I think, was called Russia Corners, Poland, New York. I consider myself a multinational. I was Russian, Poland, and American. I mean, literally, this is like a little hamlet, probably around 10 houses or so. Nearest town was Poland, New York, yeah. We lived on a non-working farm, meaning my dad wasn't a farmer, but he did buy this. He had a barn, we had lots of acreage, and so I had a lot of room to roam. Then we moved to another small town called Barneveld, New York, which is north of Utica. 375 people, so pretty small. Future Farmers America was the biggest club in high school. Again, we weren't farmers, but I had a lot of respect for those folks. The childhood was pretty classic. You know, I thought it was awesome, right? I thought I had the perfect family. There was a lot of stress about money because my dad had a business and the business was always being sued, and heavy manufacturing business. So people would get their finger chopped off in a machine and they get sued. And it was touch and go. And they had a really heavy-handed union, which almost put them out of business. They had to go and break the union, which is a crazy story in itself. Hillary Clinton, was with the union people with a big effigy of a rat, symbolizing my father.
Oh,
and they
wow.
ended up actually breaking the union because they were corrupt. I didn't really realize until much later in life, but there was a lot of stuff not so good about that, which impacted me deeply. A lot of alcoholism, generation alcoholism, both sides of my parents, and my father's actively alcoholic. My mom was classic codependent. There was a lot of verbal, emotional, and even physical abuse. We just took it in stride. It's just the way things were. Made us pretty resilient. For me, it kind of closed me down emotionally. I was walled off and shame-based, right? There's 4 basic prototypes. You can be walled off, shame-based, walled off, boundaryless, or you can be grandiose and shame-based and grandiose and boundaryless. That comes from the work of Terry Real, who's a psychologist. I was walled off and shame-based. And of course, the compensating pattern for that is to seek approval outside of yourself, right? To overachieve. And so I became an overachiever. I think that stayed with me for a long time. I was pretty blessed though with my intellect. School came really easy for me. I was blessed with my physicality. So really loved just ramming around, and we had a lot of space to ram around. And what a blessing that was, because I would consider that my first taste of meditation. So now we teach like get out in nature, breathe, fresh air, sunshine, and be quiet. Like sit in the woods, stare at a lake, stare at a mountain, hike a mountain, just stare over the expanse. And if you can do that consistently, you will have health, peace of mind, contentment, prosperity, right? Because you're in balance with Mother Nature, which is required for all humans to be in balance. And so I got that naturally, and I would love just running around the Adirondack Mountains. We spent our summers in Lake Placid. I think that also was a savior for me, because during the school year, I was in this really kind of, might call it Hicksville. Not a lot of exposure to different kind of thinking or people, pretty insular. But then in the summers, my parents had inherited this really nice Adirondack camp on the west shore of Lake Placid, which had no road access. So we had a small fleet of boats, antique wood, like Fay and Bowen, long snout, wicker seats with, beautiful mahogany wood, and also like Chris Craft runabout. We were the first one on the lake to have a ski nautique. So we
Oh,
would
wow.
do a lot of slalom skiing, a lot of barefoot water skiing, we'd go in competitions. I loved just being on the water. I would do crazy things just to figure out something to do, right? Like I built this contraption where Boston Whaler would tow me behind the boat on this like wooden platform, and I had handles on it, and then I would porpoise this platform, and I would go underwater for, 2 to 3 minutes at a time. It's like a little
Wow.
mini submarine. It's like
That's
a
wild.
harbinger of my future days as Navy SEAL. So because it was uncomfortable under the roof, right, because of my dad and the whole dynamic, I spent a lot of time outside. A lot of that time was like running around the mountains of the Adirondacks and getting in really, really good endurance shape, which then led me into endurance sports. Became a competitive swimmer at Colgate University and rode crew there. And then I got into triathlons and all that. I think part of it was for me to get out and do something healthy and to feel good about myself. And also part of it was, escaping. And then we can talk about that later when it comes to emotional awareness and emotional development, right? A lot of times people use these strategies really to run away and to escape, and they never really address the root problem. So I had to like come to an all stop later on in my life to address the root cause of some of the experiences that I was having, which were less than optimal. I didn't have a ton of friends because there weren't too many people like me. I think because we were looked at as kind of like the wealthy family in the area with a bunch of farmers and blue collar workers, that there was a lot of judgment kind of coming toward me, especially from all the guys. I didn't have a girlfriend in my hometown. I finally had a girlfriend from like Rome, New York, 2 towns over. And of course, back then, without a cell phone and without, you had to drive 45 minutes. It was a different kind of world than today. But it was all solid enough. My intellect and my athletic skills and, my genuinely good nature, which I probably can give credit to Mother Nature for that, got me into one of the top universities in the country, Colgate University. Development continued from there because now I'm exposed to a whole new group of characters from big cities, downstate New York, people with a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a lot of power. And that was really interesting for me. Again, I had a lot of work to do to kind of close the gap to where I felt even remotely worthy, right? I felt incompetent. I didn't think I was good looking, even though all the girls at Colgate said I was the best looking guy at the school, and they were all after me. But that's what trauma does to you. It distorts your reality. And then you carry that reality forward and you keep projecting it out and you keep getting back the same thing, because that's how manifestation works. That all led to my first breakdown. The first real challenge for me is after Colgate, I did get a job. So there's a few things that really boosted my confidence at Colgate. Swimming was one of them, obviously developing these friendships with these really intelligent, successful young men in my fraternity. That was huge. I saw that two of my best friends were going to go to this London study group in economics. We go to London for a semester, fall semester. And they were 4.0 students. And I was a solid 2.8 by that time, because I got off to a really bad start. In the first year, I didn't know how to study. We had never had an AP class in my high school. I'd never even heard of it. And Colgate's very rigorous academically, right? That you don't skate through that school.
I got a question for you on that. I think you told a story at one point somewhere about how you took maybe a math calculus class or something like that, and it was really, really hard, and you got a bad grade on the first exam. You dropped the class. Was that a story you told?
First semester was rough, but not because I wasn't smart, it's because I wasn't confident. I went in to be pre-med, which was largely something my mom wanted me to do. And, in an alcoholic family like that, you didn't really have the freedom to think much for myself. So that fall, I had physics, biology, chemistry, and calculus. I really enjoyed physics, but the professor was this Iranian guy. He barely spoke any English. It was very hard to learn from him. He had no capacity to make it interesting or fun. But I love the concepts of physics, and I know now why, because they're really pointing toward things of the metaphysical and spiritual dimensions that I was already having some experiences with in my long time in nature. And anyways, physics was really kind of talking about similar things with quantum physics, right? And non-local, non-linear reality, and that stuff was just coming online in the 80s when I was there. And we only had two exams, midterm and a final. The midterm exam, I took it. I remember walking out and being like, well, what the bleep was that? Every question on the exam was something I had no clue what he was talking about, and we hadn't studied. Sure enough, I got like a 28 on it. And I had never heard of a curve, never heard of an AP class. I thought I absolutely failed it. Well, I did. So I talked to my freshman advisor, who was brand new. He said, you should drop the class. And then I talked to the professor. He said, you should drop the class. What a jerk. So I dropped the class. And then at the end of the year, I'm pledging Theta Pi fraternity, and I noticed that there's another swimmer there named Chris Whalen, who's I had befriended, and he was in that physics class. And I asked him one night, I said, hey, remember that physics midterm? He goes, yeah, that was brutal. I said, yeah, I got like a 29 on it. He goes, holy shit. Like, you got one of the highest grades in the class, dude. Everybody failed it. He had the curve.
Yeah. Yeah. And the reason that I asked that question is, well, first of all, it's a good story, but I had the exact same thing happen to me. I mean, it wasn't a physics class, but it was a math class. Even at the University of Wisconsin, college algebra was hard. And being an athlete in high school, I didn't focus as much on academics as I should have. So I figured I should take college algebra to make sure that I wouldn't get my butt kicked in classes like calculus and physics. And yeah, same exact story. I dropped the class and then later found out that I probably got one of the higher grades on that first exam.
Trajectory, these things happen, right? I was saying that, things might not happen for a reason, but you can always find a reason for something that happened. And I switched from pre-med to economics. Later on, I got to spend some time in hospitals. I know a lot of doctors. A lot of my peers became doctors, and I can tell you that I would not have thrived in that environment. Right? I do not like the sterile environment of the medical profession, and I know there's many other options, but it was the right move for me. And then also that led me to that London study group where, again, I didn't have the qualifications to get in, but this is where I learned about the value of persistence for anything, right? That's worthy, right? Don't ever think that you can't do it, and never give up trying, because even if it doesn't happen the way you like it to, the learning and the growth that'll accrue through the persistence and the optimism and the faith or hope that you're going to be able to, accomplish something is worth its weight in gold. So I wanted to go with these guys. They are at 4.0. I was 2.8. The professor flat out said, I don't qualify. And it turns out that he was a swimmer. He would swim in this kind of second pool, just free swim time, and get his laps in. And so I would see him after my swim practices, and I'd go up to him. His name was Honkaledo. And I would ask him about the program and continue to express my interest. And then one day I got bold enough and asked if he had a wait list, and he said he didn't. And I said, could you start one and put me on it? He just kind of laughed. It's like, check, okay, this guy is persistent. And so this went on for several months. Still no way to budge him, because he had his standards. And then I see him at the pool one day, and he goes, Mark, we have a really important meeting coming up next Thursday. It's mandatory. Since you're on the wait list, I'd like you to come. So I came to that meeting, mandatory meeting, and one of the guys didn't show up. One of the other guys. Not my friends, but someone else. And he pulled me aside after that meeting, and he said, Mark, he goes, if you got it, if you want to go still, you got it. This is yours. And I said, you bet I want to go. The guy who missed that meeting came up to me a few days later, like fist barred. It's like, you stole my spot. And I said, no, buddy, you lost it. You lost it. So I go to Europe. I hadn't been out of upstate New York. Grew up in these two tiny little towns, and Colgate was the third biggest town I'd ever been in. And now I'm in London, learning all these new things in this different culture. And then we spent a whole month over on the continent traveling Europe and whatnot. And it just literally blew my mind. And that is what gave me the confidence my senior year to look at these jobs that these 4.0 students were applying for at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs and then some of these big accounting consulting firms, right? McKinsey, Arthur Andersen, PricewaterhouseCoopers. I thought, I wonder if I could go for it. Why not, right? I may not be the 4.0 they're looking for, but hey, I succeeded in going to Europe and blah, blah, blah. So I applied and I actually got hired by Coopers and Lybrand and Touche. So I took Coopers. So now I find myself in Manhattan, and it was a joint program with NYU, and NYU put me on academic probation. So for the fall semester, I had to prove myself, and I got straight A's. So now I find myself in Manhattan working for Coopers and Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers, becoming a certified public accountant, which is going to take me a couple of years to study and pass that exam. Going to NYU Stern School of Business at night. By all measures, by all external observation and measures, I was kicking ass, right? And within 4 years, I'd have an MBA from top business school. I'd be a certified public accountant. I'd have a terrific work experience. I could literally chart my own path. I'd go into investment banking, trading, stay in consulting, start my own business. I could do whatever. But I was miserable. Like I literally felt like I was dying inside. I was having this kind of existential crisis. And so I was looking for ways, of course, I kept physical training because physical training provided a relief valve at least, right? That was a crutch for me. So I kept doing hard physical training. I'd run every morning 6 miles. And I went to the gym at lunch when my peers were going to, getting their high carb hamburgers or whatever. I would just bang out a high intensity interval training, before we knew what that was. And then at night, I had this window of 2.5 hours between when Coopers would let us off and when we had to be at World Trade Center for school, because it was a cohort, so there are others in my program. And I looked at that time, I said, there's something I can do here that's still developmental, that's going to be good for me, or maybe help me out of this situation, to help me understand more. And I was interested in the martial arts because at Colgate, my freshman roommate, he came in as a real arrogant jerk, but he found karate, right? So I went into swimming and he went into karate. 4 years later, he had a black belt and he had completely transformed. His whole character had softened. He was much humbler. He was heading to Japan to teach English and continue his karate studies. And I didn't feel really different, except for that experience with London, which gave me confidence to get a job. I didn't emotionally feel like I'd evolved. And so I saw that and I was like, there's something about what he went through that produced demonstrable change, at least from my perspective. So I was thinking about this martial art idea, and I was walking home one night down 23rd Street. I lived on 22nd and Broadway, and I heard these shouts coming from this upstairs window, and I stopped and I look up and I was standing under the sign for World Seido Karate Headquarters. I'm like, serendipity, right? And I go up and I see the Grandmaster, Tadashi Nakamura, in the middle of the floor running a class, literally about 100 students. And this guy, I just kind of stood in awe because he was different than anybody I'd ever experienced. Not just that he was Japanese, but his presence, right? And his demeanor, right? He had this intense stability about him and seriousness, but then it was absolutely balanced with this really lightness and this playfulness. He was an enlightened master. Before I even knew what that was, I'm staring at that. And so I said, this is my mentor. So I started training with him, and a couple months into it, I stayed to watch a black belt class. And that was really cool, inspiring. And after the black belt class, everyone was being shuffled out, and they would turn the lights off, and they lit a candle in this one corner, the lights down, but lit a candle. And about 10 black belts pulled out these wooden benches and lined them up. And I was like, what are they doing over there? I said, that's the Zen class. Zen. Did some research on it. Didn't really understand what it was, but I asked Nakamura if I could join that class, and he said, sure. So I started studying Zen with him on these Thursday night hour-long sits, and then I got my own little Zazen bench and added it to my morning routine. That was a life-changing moment. Because on the one hand, I'm really starting to be eaten away inside. I had this existential angst. I couldn't open up, right? I burned through relationships with women because I was really shut down emotionally. I was abused as a kid. And I just didn't have any language or strategies, and therapy wasn't a thing back then that I could access. Those types of crises, right, usually lead to a major breakdown. But they often happen much older, that kind of midlife existential crisis. So I feel very blessed to have had this at 21, 22 years old. What saved my ass was meditation. So just like how Mother Nature kind of saved me in my youth, meditation did the same thing. Here in the middle of New York City, I would sit down on that bench and all the cacophony of the outside world would just fall away. And the process worked, right? There's something about the Zen process, which, they start out with concentration training, and you already have the breath work and the physical mountain stuff that accrues to the physical practice, right? A lot of breath work, a lot of moving with the breath, learning how to control your mind and emotions through movement, right? That's what a good movement somatic practice will do, like a martial art or Tai Chi or Qigong. But then all that is preparation to sit down and stabilize your mind through attention control and concentration practice, which was the basic Zen training that Nakamura taught. And I just did that. I followed his protocol. Inhale, exhale, count 1, don't think of anything. Inhale, exhale, count 2, don't think of anything. If you think of something, go back to 0. Start over. Try it. It's surprisingly hard.
Yeah, oh yeah. In my list here, I want to have you talk a little bit about box breathing.
That's where I developed box breathing. Before I ever learned controlled breathing in yoga years later, I was an endurance athlete. In inhale, I wanted to naturally hold my breath. So I would inhale and I would hold my breath, and then I would exhale, and then I would just pause and hold my breath. And I found that led to a really calm body with a clear mind. That was kind of the mental physical posture that stayed with me, not just during the meditation, but for long after, until eventually my breathing pattern literally shifted and changed to where I was always breathing through my nose, 5 count in, 5 count out, or holding my breath, depending on what I was doing, which had extraordinary benefits. So one of the core teachings now that I teach. Anyway, so I'm having this existential crisis around my life, my meaning. What am I here for? Why am I so miserable being a suit and collar guy on Wall Street, working in a cubicle? And so I'm sitting with those things in meditation, but I'm coming out of meditation feeling really good about myself. It was like a total refuge. Like I would feel really good. I would be in these like extended flow states, and I felt like everything was rich and thick. And so I was beginning to experience this dichotomy between what I was conditioned to be for my entire life up to that point, and this experience of peace and a deeper sense of okayness that I could tap into and touch in deep meditation. So I was like, so I want to really kind of stick with that. I didn't want to quit. I wanted to kind of keep going deeper and deeper and exploring that, because I wanted more of that and less of that. The process of meditation is really interesting. It's like the ripening of a fruit, right? You can't rush it. And a lot of people are, in America especially, are impatient. And so they sit down and they try meditation for a few weeks, and they bounce around from different apps and guided visualizations, which, by the way, is not really meditation. That's just relaxation. Meditation is the process of self-inquiry, bringing what is unconscious or beneath your consciousness into your conscious awareness, ultimately leading to the realization that you are all that is, Source, God. And that realization can be really sudden, as they talk about with Satori in the Zen tradition, or it can be gradual. But even if it's gradual, the final dropping of the fruit is sudden, right? So it's both. So I was experiencing this gradual, and I'm not talking about after 2 or 3 months. I mean, talking about now a year and a half into my practice, and 2 years in my practice. I would go into these Zen sessions for the long ones, and I would kind of drop into this timeless space. And every time I would come out of that, not only would I have this rich sense of everything's alive and, crackling with electricity, but I kept having the sense that I was meant to be a warrior, that I was a warrior. It wasn't in words, it was just a total sensation. If I'm that, then why am I here in New York working on becoming a CPA, pushing a pencil? I started to take that seriously, and then I started to ask different questions, because I'd never learned to ask good questions. It wasn't part of my growing up. We didn't sit around the table and ask good questions, and there was no inquiry. I didn't learn the art of active inquiry. I started to inquire, ask myself better questions, like, if I'm supposed to be a warrior, then how? What does that look like? And if I'm supposed to be a warrior, then how did I get here? Why am I in a suit and tie every day? And can I be a warrior as a CPA or a business guy? I don't know. Didn't seem like it. So I started to ask better questions, and then answers would come to me. And I've since learned that if you can frame a well-framed question, then you already know the answer. You just got to sit quietly and wait for it. So I started to get answers, and that's when the Navy SEALs were revealed to me. Randomly walking home one night and passing a recruiting office and seeing a poster titled "Be Someone Special" with really cool imagery of Navy SEALs doing cool shit.
Quick questions there. So that was about 1980 or so.
87, 88, 88.
I think it was in 1990 the Navy SEALs movie came out, and I saw that, and it was kind of a similar experience for me. The second question is, during our coaching session a week or so ago, you mentioned something along the lines of the quality of your life is equal to the quality of the questions you ask. Is that what you said?
Yeah, the quality of your life will be determined by the quality of the questions you ask. Well, had I not started to ask those questions and contemplate and meditate on who am I, what am I here for, what's my purpose, what are my passions, what are my principles, what's my mission? If I hadn't asked those questions, those high quality questions, I would probably be back running the family business. And I'd be miserable. I'd be living the life of quiet desperation that I was already experiencing in my 20s. So it's very important you ask good questions, but you got to ask them with absolute stillness. This is where prayer comes in. You're either asking your higher power, like God, or you're asking your higher power, which is you in the non-physical form, right? I believe that a small percentage of us is projected into this reality like a hologram. But the vast majority of what we would call ourselves, capital S selves, is non-physical. It's spiritual, right? It's not like you're incarnated and suddenly you're cut off from your spirit, or that your spirit just comes with you in the form of a soul. No, you're always connected like a tether. It's the energizing force of your life. So when you're asking a good question, you're asking your higher self, which includes your future self, by the way. Everything that's happened or is supposed to happen in your life has already happened. You can get information from your higher self about the future.
Yeah, and real quick, Mark just went real deep. I'm sure a lot of people that have never meditated or maybe never even thought about being separate from their physical body or their soul being separate from their physical body. What I challenge you to do is we're going to touch on Mark's books here in a little while. We'll probably touch on some other books too, but if what Mark just said was confusing or you didn't understand it, I highly recommend that you do some studying, because what he said, it's almost like being able to tell the future if you ask the right questions. They're already there. Those answers are there. And it's almost like magic once you get into the right kind of wavelength or flow. Spiritually, you're on this wavelength that is obviously on another level compared to the average person who has no experience with meditation, no experience with martial arts. Very good material there that I hope a lot of the viewers will dig into.
Let me put a bow in this story because it's pretty interesting. I can talk a little bit more about the metaphysical piece and how it can support you. You can ask good questions of your higher self, your spiritual self, your future self. They're all the same thing. You will get answers, but you have to be really still to be able to discern. And that's hard for people because we're really distractible. Back then, we didn't have social media, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have the internet, and I didn't spend much time watching TV at all, except for a football game or so on the weekend. You have to learn to be really still. And the only way to get really still is through the process of meditation. When you get really still and you ask these questions, you start to get these answers. If you don't take any action, then you're going to have some challenging things come your way because now you have an obligation. Like your higher self is saying, okay, good, you're ready. Here's the path. Like you're supposed to be a warrior. And if I had let my ego, which it tried like hell to derail me from that, like, oh, you can't do that. What if you fail? You're going to end up just being in the Navy, driving a boat or something. What if it's going to be a 6-year commitment? You're going to fall way behind your peers. You're not going to make any money. You're basically choosing a life of not poverty, but my peers are going on to make millions and millions of dollars. You're not going to have any of that, blah, blah, blah. Your ego, which is your left linear brain, which creates this experience of separation in time and space, and this really concretized identity of like, I am Mark. It's all based on fear. It's all based on needing to protect status quo, to protect your body, to protect from any kind of pain or suffering. And so it wants to avoid challenges. But as you know, the way to grow and learn is through challenges. Now, if you don't start to align with, like if you have a growing awareness that you're meant to do something and you're avoiding it because you're afraid, like for me, one of the things would be the judgment from my peers and my family because I'm walking away from this really perceivedly good career to join the Navy, which in my family was something that people did who didn't have any other options. So my ego's telling me, don't do it, don't go. My spirit's saying that's the way to go. I had the courage to really lean into that and say, you know what? I'm feeling such existential crisis over here. That path that my ego's trying to keep me on doesn't feel good to me. So if I stay on that path, I don't like the future I see. And I can visualize that. I visualized the future. I didn't like what I saw. Even though I probably would have stayed in New York and gotten my 6th, 7th degree black belt with Nakamura, there would have been positive aspects to it. I probably would have made a lot of money. I wouldn't have felt good about myself. And I would have walked away from my calling. And there would have been serious health consequences or some sort of major crisis or challenge as a result of that, because of that internal disconnect. Now, on the corollary to that is when you do align with and start to move toward your calling, then synchronicity happens. Things flow for you. It just becomes effortless and it becomes joyful, and it stops feeling like work. And that's what I experienced when I was shown the Navy SEALs through that poster. That was synchronicity. My officer recruiter, he first tried to talk me out of it. He said it's extremely hard to get into the SEALs from the civilian world. It may take 1 or 2 people a year. Most of the officers come from the Naval Academy or Reserve Officer Training Corps, or they're already officers in some other domain in the military. And I forced him to put a package in just on blind faith. But the one thing that I wanted to share that also I'm pretty certain put me over the edge with that is visualization. So I already had this Zen practice and I already had a breath practice. After my runs, I would do my breath practice and then meditate. And at the end of the meditation, I started visualizing. And I just took this on blind faith because my college swimming coach was kind of a pioneer with sports visualization. So this is 1983. Well, he asked me using a stopwatch to visualize my race, which is a 200-meter breaststroke. It was really hard. So I was trying to do it at night. I was living in the fraternity. There's a lot of distractions, as you can imagine. I tried to quit. And he was like, Mark, don't quit. You got to trust me on this. This is really valuable. And so because I respected him, I kept doing it. I finally was able to swim the whole race in my head. It took like two months of practice. And every time I stopped the stopwatch, I would get a time that was roughly 3 seconds faster than my fastest time. That fall, I go away to that London trip I talked about earlier. So I didn't swim. And I come back in the spring. I hadn't swum for a whole year. And I run into the coach and he says, hey, welcome back. Hey, we got our championship meet next weekend. I consider you still part of the team. You want to get in the water? And of course, my ego brain is saying no, but my head is nodding yes. So I find myself on the blocks, gun goes off, I jump in the water and I'm swimming. I'm having this incredible race, like I've swum this before, but I'm super relaxed. I touched the pad and I got the time that I had visualized.
Wow.
Last race, the fastest time I'd ever swum by far.
Wow.
And it was just like, quietly, I didn't tell anyone about it. I was just like, wow, that's interesting. But several years later now, I've got my package in to be a Navy SEAL officer. I'm training hard, right? And my mind is saying I'm gonna go for this if I get in. So I start visualizing myself. I said, well, I wonder, visualization works so well for me in terms of a sport outcome. What if I look at BUDS, Navy SEAL training, like a sport, and I practiced it in my mind? So there was a recruiting video also by the name of Be Someone Special, and I watched it 20 or 30 times, and it had all phases of BUDS, and I put myself into that video in my mind. And so I put myself, and I saw myself going through first phase. I saw myself going through second and third phase. I saw myself graduating. I began to really add a lot of emotion and energy and color and movement to it. I just kept doing it on blind faith. 9 months into that practice, like none of these practices are quick fixes. It's a practice. That's why we call it practice. It's something that you got to do every day. And so 9 months into this practice, I suddenly had this definitive shift. It almost felt like a ripple in consciousness where something changed, like a phase shift. And prior to this phase shift, I'm hoping that I'm going to get this SEAL contract. And suddenly after this phase shift, I was certain that I would get this SEAL contract and that I would be a Navy SEAL. There was no question in my mind. It had already happened. I call that winning in your mind before you step foot in the battlefield. And 2 days later or so, Nick, the recruiter, called me and said, congratulations, Mark. I don't believe it, but you got the billet. Visualization, breath control, mental management, asking really good questions, sitting for answers, all of these skills, right, were so powerful and important and literally shattered my life from this, what would have been existential crisis, life of quiet desperation as a CPA consultant, business guy, to suddenly I'm a Navy SEAL #1 in my training class, SEAL leader at SEAL Team 3. And the skills that I had developed and used, I brought with me, and I started teaching them to my SEAL teammates, starting with my first group of people, my boat crew of 6 others. And guess what? Out of a class of 185 like badasses in my SEAL training class 170, 19 of us graduated. And I was the honor man, #1 graduate, and my other 6 teammates graduated with me that day. We were using these skills: breath control, mental management, positive self-talk, visualization, radical focusing, and we were doing it as a team, supporting each other, and actually like really, really pushing for all of us to succeed. And that was rare because it was a dog-eat-dog world with everyone else. So I give you a little mini class in mental toughness right there, and using the skills, right? And I teach to this very day, and I've really refined them. And how do you like really bring a team to a level where they have 20 times the potential, right, than any one of the individuals have? It's these same skills, but done. You got to do the practice as a team then.
Yeah, and that's an awesome story. Ironically, one of the questions I had for you was about being the honor man of your SEAL class. So not only did you become a SEAL or get to BUDS, you graduated as honor man. And again, back to what you just said, visualization. You were there before you got there through the visualization. And as you just mentioned, whatever that is, 9%. 10%? Would you say 19 out of or 17 out of 190?
About 10%.
Yeah. So not only were you in the top 10%, you were #1. A lot of people when they hear the word meditation, they think about, hippies in San Francisco, and it's just a way to waste time and stuff that's just so far away from reality. It's crazy.
I mean, meditation hasn't gotten a good rap because it came wrapped in a headdress in the early 60s, and then it kind of getting wrapped up with the whole psychedelic community, and people didn't really know how to teach it. In fact, that was one of the things that I decided to try to change, right, in my way. That's why when I started teaching this through my company SealFit back in 2006, I had since then, right, I was off active duty, still in the reserves as a SEAL commander. I wanted to go deep. I learned a shit ton in the SEALs. SEALs is an incredibly powerful growth developmental process in itself. But then I studied everything I could under the sun: Tibetan Buddhism, yoga, not just physical yoga, but the Patanjali's 8 limbs and Yoga Sutras, and Bhagavad Gita, and I had over 1,000 hours of yoga teacher training. I've got 3 black belts. I was a hand-to-hand instructor with something called SCARS, in a special combat aggressive reactionary system in the SEALs, which is based upon Sansu Kung Fu. So I had a lot of training. I'd studied Tai Chi, Qigong. And so I wanted to bring this training into a training system for these SEALs. I knew that training them physically was just part of the game. I had to train them mentally and emotionally and spiritually too. And you imagine like the old samurai did, or the Shaolin monasteries. I created these 30-day academies in this training center I had in Encinitas. And these students would come live with me for 30 days. And we would feed them, we'd put them up, and we'd train from 5 in the morning or so until 8 or 10 at night, sometimes around the clock. And the system that I started to develop, called Unbeatable Mind, initially I was teaching them from or through the lens from which I learned it. So like breath work, where I learned the technical aspects of breath work, came really from the yoga tradition. They've been teaching breath training for thousands of years. So I was using terms like pranayama, which means control of the life force, and Sanskrit words for different techniques and everything. And the guys would just roll their eyes. And some of them said, well, I can't be doing this. It's against my religion. I'm like, what? Breathing's against your religion? Okay, I'd like to see you go without that for a while. So I quickly learned that I needed to teach this stuff in a very practical, outcome-based way, with language that people understood, really from the cultural lens that they would expect it. I turned these tools and practices into like drills. And I drilled them on these drills so they could experience very quickly the profound benefits. And they loved it. I call that Unbeatable Mind. It's a whole training system. And now the SEALs are actually using a lot of these tools like box breathing at BUDS now. It was hugely successful. I think anecdotally, a good 30 to 35% of BUDS graduates had trained or were training with my system, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And of those that I trained directly through my camps and academies, 90% make it through training or made it through training, SEAL training. It's pretty extraordinary.
The inverse of the selection rate is 10%, but if they went through your program, it was 90%.
Because they were in control mentally and emotionally, and most people are not in control. They're just reacting to the world. And Navy SEAL instructors, they have two jobs. One is to trigger you to get you to react negatively, so you quit or you do something stupid and get thrown out, because they can't have that in combat. So you either learn it quickly or you're gone. And the second is they're selecting their next teammates. So this is interesting. The quick story about Honor Man. My roommate, Jimmy Mann, was a Naval Academy guy, and he was a stellar athlete. He and I were neck and neck on all the physical stuff and all the academic stuff. I thought he was going to get the Honor Man, but they gave it to me because there was also a peer review and an instructor review. Now, one of the benefits of meditation is, like I said, it brings the subconscious into the conscious, and part of your subconscious is the rest of your brain. So most people think that their mind is equivalent to their brain. The mind is a subjective experience of the brain, which is in your head. This is not true, right? In fact, it's the brain that is reacting to the mind. But it's not just the brain. It's the brain in your head is like the process, central processing unit for meaning making and bringing all the sense information together and trying to make sense of it, right? To make meaning in the world. But the rest of your body is also part of that brain system. And the two other really important areas are the heart. The heart has neurons, neurological processing, neurochemicals, as well as the gut, the biome. And then your enteric nervous system, and now thinking, oh, even your fascia, right, is sending information to your central processing unit. So your whole body is your brain. And this is what we talk when we talk about whole mind or merging heart and mind, which is the word kokoro. Meditation is training to tap into that whole mind thinking. So you have the capacity to experience the wisdom of the heart and instinctual intuition of your gut. Well, that naturally softens your ego, softens the ego's grip, brings more humility, compassion, understanding, care, love. And guess what? If you're a leader, those have pronounced and a profound effect on your team because they feel seen, they feel accepted and not judged. Most leaders who simply do not do this training that might be highly intellectual, they live from the head up, and then they try to bring this kind of perfectionism, right, or my way or the highway, or I'm the leader, so I've got to have all the answers attitude in their teams, and the teams shut down because they're like, nobody can have all the answers. Nobody's right all the time. So any leader who enters a team with that attitude usually is the main obstacle to that team's performance. So because I had meditated for 4 years, when I went into my SEAL training, I had a much more open heart than I had 4 years earlier. And I was able to really put my teammates' needs before my own. But I would do it in a way that actually didn't hurt me or sacrifice on my needs because they were all taking care of me. So if you take care of your team, then they'll take care of you. And if you got a 6-person team, that's 6 people taking care of you. Wow. All of a sudden, you got a lot of power. It's not just mental training. Thoughts and emotions really are two sides of the mind, or two sides of a coin within the mind. So meditation is also emotional development, but it's difficult to find a teacher or a path that goes there. So I generally recommend people use meditation to work their way toward awareness of the patterns and issues that accrue from traumatic organization as a child that leads to neurotic conditions and things that aren't working in your life. You become aware of those patterns through meditation, mindfulness, and then you can take that out of you as an object. Instead of saying that is me, look at that and say, wow, that's an interesting pattern. I know that came from my dad's rage. Let me take a look at that. And you can take that to a therapist, right? And say, okay, this is what I think is going on. Help me out here. And you usually have some great success with that. So if you're not training your mind, someone else is training it for you because everything is training. Omnis discipline, everything is training. Everything is discipline, and discipline is training. If your discipline is to spend all day on social media, man, there's people who have got tremendous discipline to scroll social media all day. You're being trained by social media, and the results will speak for themselves. If you're disciplined enough to spend all day on social media and you find that you're super happy, you're super peaceful, you're super compassionate, you're super loving, you're super abundant, you're super fit and healthy and wise, keep doing it. That'd be extraordinary. But if it's not the case, then you need to change your disciplines. right? And probably the most powerful, important discipline is to decouple, unplug from all that crap, shut down the network news, shut down the social media, go find yourself a wooden bench, sit down and learn to be still. And then all of this stuff that's hidden from view will begin to reveal itself to you, including your purpose, your true purpose and calling in life. Your heart will begin to open and soften, and your ego will begin to like get out of the way, and you'll open up to the mystery of life and realize that, wow, it's like that Psalm 46, be still and know that you are God. You realize that the source energy that enlivens us is that, and we all have it. And so all of a sudden you just look at everyone and say, oh my God, there by the grace of God go I. Why would I want to judge that person? It'd be like judging myself. That's a pretty profound shift.
Absolutely. And it's ironic you mentioned that verse, and one of the episodes, ironically, at the end of the episode, I did mention that, we are God. And a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, what in the world is this guy saying? God is God. God is like this almost being like all powerful creature in the sky. But another verse is Acts 17:28. I took a note of this, because I want to include it in the edit of my episode. And it is, for in him we live and move and have our being. You've covered so much ground already, but who you're supposed to be manifests as you get to know yourself better through finding patience while meditating. It's like this symbiotic growth that occurs. And as you've said a couple different times, it's a process that takes time. It's social media, drugs, alcohol, they're all hacks, right? They're hacks to get your brain to release dopamine and other chemicals, and you temporarily feel good. But the great thing about meditation and working on your spiritual growth is that there's no crash, no hangover. There is not only growth in yourself, but you're able to help others.
Ken Wilber talks about the many faces of God, right? And it really depends upon someone's stage of development. But there's three primary ones, right? The first is structural relationship with an intermediary, like a church. So it's a very religious approach. So that would be like the it, it calls the I, we, and the it. That's a third party it. God is something that I find through the church, and I can't get there without the church. And then there's the I, thou, or the we experience. And this is like having a direct personal relationship with Jesus, right? Like a born again Christian or something like that. And that's so it's very personal, but it's still an entity that you think that you experience in your mind is like, oh, God is an other, and I'm having a relationship with this God or God's representative. That's an I thou. And then there's the I relationship, which is what we're talking about, which is like God is nothing other than the expression of totality. And I am part of that. This being is a spark of the divine. It's like metaphorically, it'd be like saying, okay, God is the sun and I'm the sun's ray. I'm one of the sun's rays. But is the sun's ray different than the sun? No. Right? It's the same, but it's not the same. It's a temporary, momentary expression or outpouring of the sun's love, sun's energy. I think that's a really nice way to look at it.
Yeah, and that's ironically, the sun is gold in color, at many points as it moves through the sky. And that bit of knowledge right there is gold. I mean, for people that watch this who are feeling lost or confused, maybe they're an atheist. I always ask people who tell me they don't believe in God to explain, describe an object, a cell phone or whatever, and say, well, where did this come from?
If you don't believe in God, then you don't believe in yourself.
There you go.
Because you can't exist were it not for God. We are all expressions in, let's say, God's mind, with another kind of metaphorical look. Like God is having these thoughts. We are a thought in God's mind. And God, it's just a word, right? You can use other words, source, right? Supreme reality, or reality itself. The whole tradition of Advaita Buddhism, Advaita means not two, but it also means not one, not two, not one. But anyways, the idea of dualism is up, down, left, right, time, space. This feeling and experience of separation, which is considered to be an illusion from the perspective of non-duality, which is everything is all the time, no separation, no time, no space, just one continuous outpouring of source energy, Sat Chit Ananda, being, consciousness, bliss. Well, the experience as concretized by the mind, the human mind, takes that all is and creates this experience of separation with a unique stamp or blueprint or genetic/soul orientation, which is for a purpose, and that's to evolve. So every one of us as an individual ray of the sun is here to evolve and grow on our way back, our journey back to source, let's say. So we're going to grow in a unique way, and we can call that our purpose. And so our overarching purpose is to figure out what our purpose is. And then our second purpose is to grow through the challenges and the opportunities that are afforded by aligning with that purpose. So the experience is very real. It's designed to be that way. It's designed to feel separate so that we can experience love and loss and dualistic energies that lead to the growth. At the same time, we are also all that is. The only thing standing between you and an enlightened awakenment is this giving up this false perception that you are a separate being. And meditation does that. So this is back to where if you've never experienced meditation and you tell someone you are God, then their ego says, yeah, that's right, I'm God. Or their ego says, I can't possibly be God. Well, we're not talking about the ego taking ownership of this idea. We're talking about blasting the ego so it's like gets the hell out of the way and you realize that you were God all along, having this experience as Justin or Mark. And this brings us to the great Jnani Yoga wisdom tradition path of India, which has you ask the question, who am I? Who am I really? And the way Ramana Maharshi would teach is like, go through everything, go through your life. Am I really Colgate BA? Am I an MBA? No, this body achieved an MBA, but it's not who I am. Am I a competitive swimmer? No, I'm not. This body did some competitive swimming, but it's not who I am. Am I my thoughts and emotions? No, actually, when you look at those, you can't find any mark within there. All I can find is a bunch of experiences that turned into memories that have some contextualization around them, some sort of meaning that I placed, either good, bad, or indifferent. And there's large chunks, gaps in those memories. Barely remember anything between 2 and 8 years old. So you can't rely on memories and you can't rely on the ideas and beliefs. And by the way, as I learned sitting on that bench, that most of those were flawed. They were wrong. They led me down the wrong path. So your entire story of your life that you think is of you, as you is just engineered. It's an accretion of experiences and beliefs and emotional patterns, some good, some bad. And nowhere within there can you find a central organizing person called you when you investigate. But the more we tell that story about ourselves, the more concretized it gets, the more it feels like it's true that I am these things. And this is where you get so caught up in the dramas of life because, someone does something that triggers you and you get angry. You're like, I am angry. But upon investigation, you'll find that you are actually not angry. Anger is happening. But it's not who you are. And that's freedom. Meditation will lead you to freedom because it frees you from this small contracted identity, which is actually causing all the problems in your life, your ego, personality/ego, to be clear. The problem with the personality ego is it can only operate because, again, it's the part of your brain that separates you in time and space. It creates this linear experience of time, and we experience it in our culture from left to right, but some cultures experience it from right to left, or from top down to bottom up, right? Time is really a trained thing. If you go back to the native cultures or Aborigines, they don't experience time anything like we do. Our concretization of time has gotten insane, down to the second and minute, and we schedule and block our days and our weeks, and we've gotten disconnected from the rhythms of nature and long cycles. You have to realize all that is just training. So that part of you, that ego, brain, personality, time, space part of you, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. It's the way the game is rigged. It necessitates that you, in the now moment, you're pulling from memory to make meaning of what's happening now, meaning of the data that's happening now, which means that a large amount of the data that you're taking in, which is massive compared to what you're actually able to perceive, is all being filtered based upon your memory. And the stuff that doesn't make sense or doesn't fit gets ignored. And so what you're left is with whatever fits the pattern or might slightly add to the pattern. Like I listen to a podcast, oh, that's interesting. Joe Rogan said that, and oh, that adds to something I already knew. It's confirming that I'm heading in the right direction with that idea, or that idea makes sense. And then so you're pulling from memory and you're contaminating your present moment with all that. And you're cutting yourself off from new understanding because your cup isn't empty. That's the whole meaning of Zen term. You got to empty your cup to allow newness in. But if your cup is always full because you're pulling from everything you knew and trying to make sense of it, then you project that into the future and you're guaranteeing that your future is going to look exactly like your past. So meditation, the process of meditation, it gets us into really our right hemispheric thinking. It's more than whole mind thinking is beyond time and space. It's nonlinear, non-local. It's present. It's in the here and now. And in the here and now, the experience of being right here, right now has a smack of reality to it, which is different than when you're thinking about the past or ruminating about the future. And you can really quickly train yourself to experience that difference.
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with Viktor Frankl, I think, is most famous for the, in between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space lies an opportunity for you to decide. As you just mentioned, anger or saying I'm mad or that pissed me off, that's a decision you made. It doesn't feel like it to most people, but like my wife has told me over the last, well, we've been together now for over 10 years, and when she met me, I'm not going to say a different person, but I had an alter ego named the Hulk. It was possible that he could manifest himself, and once the Hulk was out, it was clearly did not feel like a decision I had made. It was just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And once it exploded, it would take, if you let yourself get pissed, you get there and your whole being is mad. They say on average it takes people 20 minutes to calm down.
Right.
Whereas now I'm a lot more calm, and with my businesses, it can be so hard, especially in the beginning, to separate that response from the stimulants.
The trigger stimulus is the past. The reaction is the future. And without any training, there's no separation. The past immediately becomes that reacted future. But with training, developing the capacity to be present, then what you find is become the witness. You're just observing what's happening, and you see this trigger, and you see this thing happening, which is quickly spilling into the past, but it's happening. That's bringing up this trained or conditioned response, and you see that response is going to play out in the future in this bout of anger. You're going to turn into this green monster suddenly, right? And it's going to take a while to put him back in the bottle. And so through training, you learn to catch, they call it catching the snake at the head. So imagine a viper, right? If it strikes you and you catch the tail, it's likely going to whip around and bite you. That's what most people do. By the time they finally figure out what's going on, that 20 minutes or an hour, sometimes the whole day has gone by or more. And they've dumped their drama on everybody and blamed everybody and played the victim and damaged relationships, damaged their own health, because this is so negative. So through meditation, you open up more and more of that space to be the witness, and you see it happening, and you're able to catch the snake right at the head. And that means you become non-reactionary. You're like, oh, yeah, I see where I would have gone down this path even yesterday or last year, and I'm not going to do it right now. I'm just going to let it go. And you get cut off in the road. In the past, you would flip the guy off and run him down. Now you just smile and be like, oh, that was a good one. Yeah, I'm not going to let that bug me today.
Yeah, it's kind of like a combination of no surrender and surrender at the same time. You're surrendering to the fact that you're in this reality with other people, but you're not surrendering to what feels like reaction that just naturally occurs. You're slowing things down, you're analyzing, and you're choosing not to flip the guy off or chase him down the road. And it's another example of something that you got to practice.
Transformation is basically simply getting to this present moment awareness where your cup is empty and all possibilities exist. Like all possible outcomes, solutions, paths exist for you. And to literally slow time down, this is the choice that's going to lead to the most positive outcome, to actually change the future for the better. I want to read a quote by Roy Bohm, which just reinforces this idea that why people keep getting the same thing over and over. Like that quote from Einstein, if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that's the definition of insanity. But people keep doing the same thing because they haven't trained their mind to open the space in present moment awareness for new things to enter. And so you just end up recreating different versions of the same past over and over and over. Reality is what we take to be true. What we take to be true is what we believe. What we believe is based upon our perceptions. What we perceive depends upon what we look for. Wait for it. What we look for depends upon what we think. What we think depends upon what we perceive. What we perceive determines what we believe. What we believe determines what we take to be true. And what we take to be true is our reality. It's a circular game.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome? So you got to stop everything, stop the clock, stop space, and just stare at reality in the face. And that's an inside job. Perception is, anyways. What it means is turn away from your thoughts and emotions, what we perceive to be the thinking mind. Turn away from that. And with awareness, look for awareness. I've heard my Zajin Buddhist teacher used to say, awareness will reveal itself to itself through itself. Because you are awareness, right? So like near-death experiences, people float above their bed. How can they see if their eyes are stuck in their head down on the table? How can they be aware of what's going on? Well, awareness. The spiritual dimension of you has sensory capabilities that are not limited to or tied to the body's organs. So awareness is what's always ever present. But you're taught to think that it's the experiences and the memory and your thoughts that are the only thing that are real. Meditation practice, you turn toward awareness and you seek your center of self, your perception of self with that awareness. And what you begin to experience is that at first it's intermittent, and then it becomes more stabilized, and then it becomes your permanent new identity, and it's non-personal. Meaning like when all the time, and I'm observing and just witnessing, it's not Mark, it's just the sense of everything, right? I am everything observing through these eyes. It includes the memory and the mind of Mark and the body and even that softening sense of Mark being the center, having a concretized center, which I can see that it doesn't. So a lot of people are afraid of meditation or awakening or enlightenment because they think you suddenly become some amorphous blob, right? You lose all your identity and don't care about anything. You don't lose your identity, you just expand so far beyond it that you don't take it as seriously. This is where humility and humor come in, because the more evolved you are, the more humility to have, and the more humorous your life starts to look. Look at all that drama that I created in the past. I can look through my life and like every single shit show and thing that happened, I'm like, I somehow created the conditions for that to happen, consciously or subconsciously, mostly subconsciously.
Yeah, I mean, the way you just put it is great. And it goes hand in hand with the word that you've mentioned a couple times too, enlightenment. Because once your vision, and I'm not talking about your physical vision, but your enlightened vision from when you're meditating, once you get to a point with your meditation, you realize that there's just so much more once you start to separate that ego from everything else.
Right.
It's really, really interesting. I think you told me in a prior conversation that it takes 100 lifetimes to get to the point where you can meditate well, or what was that?
This is from the yoga tradition. They say it takes 1,000 lifetimes to find yoga. And again, they're not talking about yoga is meditation. It's everything we're talking about. And again, we would like to think of them as like linear, but it's really not. It really is what you karmically accrue energetically, positive and negatively, and what you still want to learn and experience. And so the challenges you see are going to be informed by the karma, and the calling is going to be informed by the experience that is desired. And I've heard it said that on the soul's journey home, it wants to experience everything it can. Born in America, having the great privilege that I had growing up with that really healthy body and the intellect I have and the safety, I think that is a reward, right? Whereas if you aren't necessarily that as evolved, or you had a really negative karmic, accretions in the prior life, you may end up being born and find yourself on the front lines in Ukraine or Syria or something like that, or Hamas, or some poverty situation. There's a lot of theory, and again, you don't want to like get too wrapped up in it, like doing past life transgressions. I don't think there's a whole lot that can be learned. It's interesting, but your time is best spent just in direct inquiry, sitting in silence, learning how to still yourself, still your mind, and being able to experience this distinction between I am and there are thoughts and emotions. And so you stay with that experience of I am. And I am is non-personal. It's not like, yeah, I am Mark. No, I am. And within the field of I amness, there is this body that's been named Mark that has had these accreted experiences and has made meaning out of that along the way. And it's important, right? Because this is the body that I have. And it's the body mind that I have that was given to me to basically fulfill this earthly mission and calling and experience the opportunities and challenges that I'm supposed to experience for evolution. When you develop this capacity to witness and observe, it doesn't mean you suddenly don't care about the world. In fact, it's the opposite, right? You take great care. Your compassion grows. You may be curious and non-judgmental and not participating in the drama anymore, but that doesn't mean you don't care. It just means you're not going to contribute to the suffering of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, and for the viewers that are watching this, hopefully when they hear 1,000 lifetimes, they're not thinking, oh my God, that's why I can't meditate. I need more time. It's the good news or great news is that if you're watching this right now, you were meant to watch this podcast right now and listen to this conversation and hopefully get some help to get to that point where you need to be in order to have a little bit more patience when you're trying to meditate or spend a little bit of time, read one of Mark's books. I think Mark touched on guided meditations earlier, which are one thing, and then getting to the point where I meditate every morning for at least 40 minutes. Like it's even when I do, we don't really drink much anymore, but even if I have a few drinks and I don't feel well in the morning, I'm still meditating. It's a part of my daily routine that is not negotiable. I did have another or a couple more questions about the Navy SEAL portion of your life. So you mentioned Team 3. Were you on teams 1 and 3?
I was at Team 3, and then I had orders to go to Team 1, but the Team 3 CO just asked if I could stay at Team 3 to take on another platoon, so I did. And then I went to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 1 in Hawaii. That's the mini submersible. And in the reserves, I was at Reserve SEAL Team 1, 3, and 5 when they were combined, and then they're split out. I was Reserve SEAL Team 1 commanding officer for a bit. Different place, SOCPAC, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, etc. Mostly West Coast and Hawaii. I didn't do any East Coast tours.
You were into all sorts of U.S. SOCOM, Joint Special Operations Command. When you were in that point or at that living that part of your life, Det 1, which a lot of people don't even know what Det 1 is, but that's serious business.
When I was active duty, so I spent about almost 10 years on active duty. And to include the years that I was mobilized when I went to Iraq and other places in the Middle East. When you're on active duty as a SEAL, you're doing a lot of training. And so it's the way that I approached the training that was unique, right? I approached it with much more awareness. So every time I was training, I wasn't just training the skill, I was training my mind. I was working on the breath, I was working on my mindfulness, I was working on staying connected with witness, I was using my visualization skills, et cetera, et cetera. So I was getting a lot of training. When I left active duty, I went back. That's when I started the Coronado Brewing Company, but I was a reserve officer. I wasn't getting all that training anymore. Learned the hard way that I needed to go back to my daily discipline practice, my rituals. And there was a brief period of time when I was launching the brewery where I was sucked into all sorts of drama with my brothers-in-laws who were not exactly the most ethical people in the world. And I shouldn't have been in business with them. I was making a lot of assumptions based upon my experience in the SEALs with teammates that I could respect, that would honor, that would do the right thing. And none of that's true in the civilian world, necessarily. Everyone's coming from a different walk of life and has a different going on. And I got caught up in a mess there. And I realized that it was largely not necessarily my own creation, but could have disengaged from it and made much better decisions had I been practicing. So I went back and I committed. I said, I'm never going to leave my practice again. I took it for granted in the SEALs because I was always training, shooting, blowing things up, jumping on it, and all of it required great mindfulness and awareness. Anyway, so during my reserve time, one of the things that I got hired to do was to go in and help the SEALs redevelop their pre-deployment major exercise, because in the past, especially during the Cold War, it was really it was about a hard target going after and, taking down like a radar station or something like that. And now after Afghanistan and Iraq kicked off, it suddenly became soft targets and we were hunting people, which is interesting because that's what we were doing in Vietnam, right? With hunting the Viet Cong, but we had gotten away from that during the Cold War. So came back in. This is when I learned that I had I was very creative and good at developing innovative training programs, right? Which you saw later play out through SEAL Fit and Unbeatable Mind, Kokoro, and stuff like that. So I worked with a guy named Bart Jackson, warrant officer, to develop this certification exercise, CERTEX, which was intelligence driven and all human centric. We used places like the BRACT bases, St. George and March Air Force Base in California, and we would go up and set up villages and have 300 or 400 role players and we would have intel driving the decision making and the battle rhythm. And it was pretty extraordinary, very successful. One of these iterations had SEAL Team 1 just been assigned the Marine Corps SOCOM Det 1. And SOCOM is Special Operations Command. So the real quick backstory there is Marine Corps wasn't part of Special Ops until late 2000s. 2004, I started running these CERDEXs, or 2003, I ran these CERDEXs, and then the Marines were like seeing what's going on with all the money flowing to Spec Ops, and they're finally like, we want to be part of this. And so Rumsfeld, who was SecDef, said, okay, you're not going to just throw a Spec Ops unit together. You're going to have to figure this out and validate it and figure out what your swim lanes are and whether you can even do this. And so he said, you're going to do a proof of concept and you're going to have the SEALs run it. And well, the Marines were pissed about that. They did not want that. But Rumsfeld said, look, you're the Department of the Navy. That means the Navy is in charge of you. The Navy's Special Ops is the SEALs. So you work for the SEALs for an entire year, and they will help determine whether you have a place in Spec Ops. Of course, the Marines thought the SEALs would spoil it for them. Not right. They weren't wrong, because there were a lot of SEAL officers who wanted to. The guy who was in charge, Captain O'Connell, Jim O'Connell, was super fair. He was one of the most fair SEAL officers, which is why he was brought out of retirement to run the war effort. At any rate, they wanted someone who had some research capabilities, but who also was a SEAL. And here's yours truly, who was running the CERDEX, but I was also at the time knee deep in my PhD in leadership at University of San Diego. And so someone mentioned, hey, you know, got Lieutenant Commander Devine, he's doing research at USD on leadership. He's also helping us with these CERDEX, doing a bang up job. I think he can be our guy to help do the study on our end. And then the Marines had hired someone to do the study for them. And so I found myself being deployed to Iraq. Actually, I put them through the CERDEX with SEAL Team 1. That was interesting. 100-man SOCOM Det with a 120-man SEAL platoon. And they were all doing different operations. It was just super dynamic. Marines were kind of a shit show at that point. But then they go to Iraq, and I deploy to Iraq with them. This is like, things are just starting to heat up in the insurgency. And the Marines made a huge tactical error. When they were thinking of Iraq, they were thinking of like Rommel's desert rats, you know, running around in the sand dunes. And so they hired a bunch of these Mercedes IFABs as their vehicles. And by the time they got over there, the ground warfare in the cities was getting gnarly with all these IEDs and 50 cals blowing up the vehicles. And so the SEALs had already adapted all these Humvees with up armor, right? They're like bolted and basically a bunch of really thick steel plates all around these Humvees. You know, look like Mad Max. And so we got over there with the Marines. They bring their IFABs out, and within days, they're like, we can't use these. And of course, the procurement system was like, okay, yeah, we'll send them back, and then, you know, we'll have Humvees sent over for you. It'll probably take about 6 months. And they're like, we're only here for 6 months. The whole proof of concept will be a fail. And Captain O'Connell knew this too. And so the commanding officer of SEAL Team 1, Bill Wilson, and said, we got to help these guys solve this. It's the right thing to do, right? I mean, an asshole SEAL could have been like, sorry, too bad, so sad. You lose, you fail. I guess you don't join Spec Ops. And so the same guy I worked with in CERDEX, and I give him a lot of credit for our success, Bart Jackson. Wilson called Bart his asset reallocation specialist. So he turned to Bart and said, Bart, we got to solve this. Yes, sir. How much do you want to know? He was like, I don't need to know unless it's really going to get me in trouble. You know, New York Times test. If I'm going to read about it in the New York Times on Monday, I want to know. If not, you out of handshake deals. This is wartime. Check. And Bart took some SEALs, and they came back like 48 hours later, these 6 Humvees into the compound, and they took them right to the SEALs area, and they started up armoring them. And the Marines are like, suddenly realized that the machines were for them. And so they came over and, you know, started getting elders, and it became a huge, you know, breaking down between these Marines and these SEALs. And the Marines realized these guys have our back, because we wouldn't be operating without these vehicles. And Bart never really gave the full story. Something about a National Guard unit that he bribed. Isn't that great? While I was in Iraq for that time period, every morning, you know, we would stay up late into the night, and I wasn't kicking down doors. You know, I was at risk because everyone was at risk, and I was out beyond the wire here and there, but I was with the head shed. You know, I wasn't like with the platoon anymore. But still, we wouldn't retire until after the platoon was back from kicking in doors and whatever. And so we're in bed 2 or 3 in the morning, usually up by 10. And most people would just, do their run around the compound and some push-ups and, that rinse repeat type of thing. I would go over, I'd found a place that was near, this is an old compound in Baghdad that used to be Saddam Hussein's, like summer residence or something like that. Or maybe it was his palace residence. And there was a lake, it was kind of gnarly at the time, all shot up, pockmarked and everything. And there was these old dachshunds, and I found this one, and I set up next to the pool. Pool was empty, again, all bullet holes everywhere. And I would do my practice. A lot of what you see in Kokoro yoga that I developed later, right? Integrated physical, mental, emotional training. I did it every day for an hour and a half, every single day that I was in the combat zone. And it included breath work, included meditation, included visualization, included yoga asana, included, high intensity functional physical workout, pure integration training. I got stronger and stronger and more optimistic and abundant, or not, I just felt better every day. Whereas a lot of the other guys were really starting to fray at the seams about the midway point because they didn't have that practice of integration. And so when I came home from Iraq, it gave me a lot of courage to really lean into that type of training. And that's when I started SEALFIT. In fact, I decided while I was on that deployment to leave the PhD program because I didn't want to be an academic. I saw clearly that, the academic world is not the same as knowing. Knowing can only be developed and earned, right? Knowledge can be learned, but knowingness and wisdom has to be earned. And that has to be done under pressure in dynamic training environments using a multidimensional integrated methodology. And that's where the 5 mountains come from: training physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, and spiritually, with daily practices and weekly rituals and monthly challenges and et cetera, et cetera. And that became SEALFIT. I launched SEALFIT a year after leaving the war zone.
When you were over there in Saddam's compound doing your morning rituals, did you ever have any of your teammates join you?
I remember Bill Wilson being curious and asking about it. He was a commanding officer, and he came and observed me one day. But this is still pretty fringy. I don't think, Bill didn't, but I think a lot of the guys just thought I was a little bit out there with that practice. All the real true warrior traditions integrated these things and practiced them. Right? The fact that we weren't doing it in our U.S. military, or let alone our special ops, is really puzzling. And it's gratifying to see that they saw the results with my SEALFIT athletes and warriors, and so they couldn't ignore it. I always think, though, I should have trademarked box breathing, though.
Yeah. I think Unbeatable Mind, you mentioned the 5 mountains. And if I remember correctly, you outlined those in Unbeatable Mind.
It's a training system or model. At a kind of the meta level, it's mastering the self in service. How you're supposed to master yourself and how you're supposed to serve, well, that's part of the training. You got to uncover that. Now, the methodology is integrated development, which leads to vertical growth, and vertical changes who you are, not just what you know. So we're looking for knowingness beyond knowledge, theory to practice to mastery. So we train ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, intuitionally, and spiritually, and we had methods for each one of those. And some of them, like box breathing, can overlap and touch all 5 of those domains. And so then we develop what we call a 5-mountain training plan that you enact on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. And then you have adjunct practices which help keep you focused so you can stay on target with your mission, that help you deepen your connection to other people, that keep your body, mind in optimal performance, and that continue to expand your sense of self through your witnessing capacity so that you develop a greater, more powerful story of future, and then visualization practices to visualize that future. So there's a lot there, but that's the essence of it.
So that was book number 1, if I remember correctly. And then book number 2 was Way of the SEAL. And a couple of things I jotted down here for Way of the SEAL was establish your set point, front sight focus, think offense always.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on those a little bit?
Yeah, so whereas Unbeatable Mind is really about your philosophy and training manual for life, the Way of the SEAL is basically how do you lead like a Navy SEAL under pressure? And guess what? We're always under pressure, especially nowadays. So the set point was really about understanding where you are right now so that you have a solid foundation to push off from when you decide where you need to go, right? Because a lot of people just focus on where they want to go, but they have no realistic assessment of where they are.
Oh yeah, and a lot of times people are delusional.
Exactly. So you got to be really brutally honest with where you are right now in your physical health, and you can break that down, in a couple different ways. Plus, be honest about your own mental state and development, right? Just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you're mentally strong or that you even know how to use your mind or that you've developed any capacity to be aware as opposed to just caught up in your thoughts. And in fact, I often find that some of the most arrogant, reactionary people are those who have really leaned so much into the academic world of knowledge and they turn it into a freaking sport.
Yeah, yeah, the sport and related debates and PR battles and in many cases a waste of time.
Because they're always trying to be right, because they've spent all this time and money proving that they know so much. And that cuts them off from wisdom, compassion, understanding. Like Stephen Covey says, first seek first to understand, then to be understood. Don't just ram your beliefs and opinions down my throat. Philosophy, like you got to know where you stand in order for you to stand your ground. And a lot of times when you take a hard look at that, you're like, ooh, I need to take care of this. There's some foundational work I need to do to shore up my situation before I go after these higher principles, right? It's like Miyagi with wax on, wax off. The secret, he wants the secret right now. And Miyagi's like, no, go wax the fence, right? So that's why with the five mountains, physical mountain is first because many people aren't ready for meditation because your body has to be healthy for your brain to be healthy. And if you want to be able to tap into whole mind thinking, your body has to be healthy so you can connect to your heart mind, your belly mind. Your brain has to be able to operate comfortably at an alpha state. And most people are in high beta gamma because they're stuck in hyperarousal. So we have to do some work with arousal control. And we can use breath work for that. So box breathing and other breath will bring arousal control. Hydration is big. Sleeping is big. Weight management is really big. Just really balancing the body. So that could take some time. It might take 3, 6 months, might take a year or longer for some. And it doesn't mean you can't do any of the work on the other mountains, especially the mental and emotional, but you really want to prioritize shoring up the foundation, right? Because it's that foundation that you use, the foundation of the body mind that's calm and alert. It's the mind that trains the mind. So if your mind is racing out of control because your body's not healthy, then how are you going to train your mind with your mind? You can't do it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I'll mention here it's a perfect time that I reached out to Mark. I don't know if you even remember this, Mark, or not, but I read Way of the Seal first, and then I went back and read Unbeatable Mind. I read them out of order. And after I'd read two of your books, I reached out on LinkedIn and just said, thank you, sir, for your service, and thank you for taking the time to write these books. They're helping me in various ways. Then I read, I think it was Staring Down the Wolf, which we can touch on next. And I was like, man, this Mark Divine is really, he's talking to me through these books. So then I reached back out on LinkedIn again and said, hey, man, do you do any coaching? I'm ready to go from reading and acting based on what I'm reading to some personalized coaching. And this was over a period of years. When we do our coaching sessions, sometimes, like in this last case, a lot of time went by between the prior session and this most recent session because Mark will give you so much. It's not about making money for coaching sessions to Mark. It's like when you have a coaching session with him, you're in a flow, or at least I am. Kind of go from point to point, and he drops these words of wisdom, and it's like I just said, a multi-year process. Like it's been probably at least 5 years
Mm-hmm.
since I reached out the first time. So Mark's mentioned, he just mentioned Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That's a phenomenal book. Highly recommend that. A lot of this stuff that we're touching on, I highly recommend, and we'll include it in the podcast notes. We'll include links and we have resources on our website, but there's just so much here to unpack and act on that I hope everyone takes the time to really dig into because it's speaking of the physical mountain. My weight has fluctuated over the years. We've touched on alcohol a little bit. I got introduced to alcohol by some friends at a relatively young age, and I lived kind of a split life as an athlete, a competitive athlete on the one hand, and on the other hand, 15 years old, I was partying pretty hard. And like Mark, my dad is a CPA, and ironically, my stepmother worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So my dad was very much don't smoke, don't drink, don't do drugs. And when I found out that they don't really kill you immediately, usually, and I had a kind of a different childhood. Mark mentioned some trauma in his childhood. I didn't really necessarily have physical trauma, but I went through some stuff. And if you're interested in learning on all that, you can listen to or watch episode 0. But anyway, from the physical side of things, I lost most recently a couple years ago. I think it was right around 50 pounds. And it's amazing how much that shoulder pain or back pain or knee pain and your blood pressure and all these things get better by just getting yourself into shape, because with medications, you're treating symptoms. And the entire medical system, I hate to say it, for many decades now has been pretty much dedicated to having you stay on those medications. It's not about the cure, it's about the treatment of the symptoms because that's how they make their money. So if you can read these books that we're discussing and who knows, maybe even schedule a coaching session, it's really amazing. Like I haven't taken medications for years, like none. And even supplements, I don't really take too many supplements. I'm not saying I wouldn't, a lot of the stuff, I don't know, Mark, what your thoughts are on it, but they're offering a lot of genetic testing now, where like genetic methylation tests that'll tell you like based on your specific genetics, what your, mineral and supplement modification should be. That's all really interesting stuff. I just wanted to drop that in there real quick because this stuff is, as I mentioned earlier, it's like gold. And the whole point of this podcast is to help people. So speaking of staring down the wolf, that's the next one. We've got the fear wolf versus the courage wolf and VUCA. Would you mind commenting on those?
Of course. So VUCA is terminology that we've been using for years in the military. Now it's kind of gone mainstream for business. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that's what we train for in the SEALs. Interestingly enough, the training of the mind that we've been talking about also leads to the same ability to navigate VUCA because you become non-reactionary, right? You're that center post in the middle of the storm. But it's really important that as you begin to do this work, you have to see how much negativity has taken hold in your life. Right? The brain is literally wired to be negative. It's 5 times as negative as it is positive. And it's because all information comes in through the amygdala. The amygdala is sniffing for danger. Anything that's going to put you at risk. And it can find it in a lot of places that aren't really putting you at risk. Time management and the feeling of being late or feeling of like being trapped in traffic. And that's very triggering. You're going to get triggered in this sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. But it's actually all bullshit. Your actually life is not threatened unless your boss is a real rageaholic. Furthermore, we've been trained with negative programming and conditioning. It's like you've been baked in it like a soup. You've been stewed in negativity for your entire life, right? Fear porn, they call it, negative news, even humor. A lot of humor is sarcastic and negative. And so you're so baked in it that you almost don't even see it as negative. Growing up, I couldn't see how poisonous and negative my father was. It took meditation for me to draw that contrast. So that's where the metaphor of the wolves come in, right? It's from the Native American tradition of the way I heard the story is the grandfather sitting around with the kids and he's telling this story. He said there's 2 wolves that live inside you, the fear wolf and the courage wolf. And the fear wolf lives in your head. It feeds off of negativity, fear. And the courage wolf lives in your heart. And the courage wolf feeds off of love, compassion, and forgiveness. And he says they're always kind of fighting each other, fighting for control of your attention. The kids ask, well, grandfather, which wolf wins in the long run? And he said, the one that you feed the most. The idea of staring down the wolf was that you need to learn to feed courage and open your heart and begin to do the work of self-awareness so that you can see all the different patterns that are fear-based or negative-based or avoidance-based that have been driving your decision-making and that are interfering with your leadership capacity and interfering with the team's ability to thrive. Fear of discomfort, right? Fear of the unexpected challenges, fear of risk, fear of judgment, fear of vulnerability, fear of standing out and being different, right? These are all different aspects. So I identified 7, I call them commitments, that if you commit to developing the practice of this commitment or this virtue, starting with staring down the fear that's leading to either the obstruction of that virtue or the limitation of it, then you can progressively open up more and more and have more and more success as a leader as well as your team. And those commitments are courage. That's the first one. Everything all starts with courage, opening your heart, right? Staring down the fear of risk. And then trust. Trust is the glue that holds a team together, or once broken, that glue is, it's like super glue. It doesn't stick back together. It takes a long time to repair from a breach of trust. So it takes courage to be trustworthy, and that means you have to be super transparent and humble, and admit that you don't have all the answers, or admit when you made the mistakes. Take extreme responsibility for that, and build upon courage, courage and trust comes respect, right? Because respect really is what allows the team to operate fast and with loose hierarchy, meaning like you want to move fast and break things, you got to have a lot of trust and respect to know that your teammates are doing what's for the best of the team, which means they're doing what's best for you. They're not just acting selfishly. And everyone is invited to the party, right? Everyone is valuable, from the youngest and newest person to the oldest and wisest. Everyone knows that everyone's belief systems can be challenged. And so you learn to be brutally honest, and that develops great respect. Respect for opinions, respect for people, respect for, skills, the variation of skills, and etc. So those three are the foundation: courage, trust, respect. Those are commitments, so they become practices. And I talk about the team developing these practices together, because the team is the new leader in this world. And then what you do is that unlocks growth, which is the fourth commitment. But as we've been talking about this whole podcast, that is something you can also facilitate by implementing integrated vertical development, right? Multidimensional training, which the SEALs, military spec ops do. They're paid to do it, but everyone can take advantage of that and to unlock accelerated growth. Then build upon all these, then suddenly you have the capacity to operate with excellence, because everyone is firing at a very high level, rowing in the same direction. But it's not like rowing in the same direction with all the oars dipping in at different times. All the oars are dipping at the same time. Like if I rowed crew, when all oars grabbed the water at the same time, the boat would literally lurch out of the water. All the rest of the time, it felt, even though we were moving fast, it felt kind of sluggish because you had 8 oars, just slightly different patterns. And that experience of excellence comes when all the oars hit the water at the same time, and you just leap forward as a team. And that takes curiosity and innovation and creativity, which are the wellspring that lies within all of us, which is tapped into through these internal practices that we've been talking about. It's not that some people have them and others don't. It's that everyone has it, but you got to learn to be still enough and trustworthy enough to be able to tap into those skills of innovation and curiosity and creativity. And then the sixth is resilience. So you learn, like in the Navy SEALs, that there's always going to be an obstacle, and that obstacle is your opportunity to learn and grow. There's no such thing as failure, only failure to learn. And so you realize that failure is not an option, because every situation has a seed of learning in it. And so even if it doesn't work out, that's not a failure, because you learn and grow. And that's what resilience is. When you look at an obstacle and you're going, yeah, good. Here's an opportunity to grow and learn. And I'll find a way or make a way around or through this obstacle, and I'll be stronger and better for it. And so resilience has qualities of optimism, forward-focused, persistence, positivity, never pessimistic, never glass half full, right? Always figuring it out, knowing that this is just one way that's going to help me, one obstacle that's going to help me get to where I want to go. And then the last commitment is alignment. Once you have courage, trust, respect, growth, excellence, resilience in a team working, it's much easier for everyone to get aligned. But also, because of all the other work, alignment usually happens automatically. And that means everyone is really keyed in and clued in on the vision and the why behind what you're doing. And then they're not going to waver, because they're in such alignment with that. And if they hadn't been alignment, they would have left the team or been forced off the team long before this. So that's staring down the wolf. It requires, there's a lot of great strategies in there, but the whole point is that in order to develop that level of elite teaming, right, you got to do your work as a leader, and everyone does. You got to stare down your fears, right? You got to eradicate the neurotic patterns from childhood trauma. You have to get rid of the isms and the usnesses, like righteousness and pessimism or perfectionism, right? Or procrastinationism. The things that hold your team back. The leader is the obstacle. And so the leader needs to take responsibility for staring down the fear,
Yeah, and for those of you who are watching this who are not in business or not in leadership positions right now, uh, it's so much incredibly harder to build an elite team than one might think or assume. With my current businesses, I've been at it for 9.5 years. And in the beginning, we were a group of people trying to work together. We were not a team. We literally had guys that, had breathalyzers in their vehicles, fresh out of jail, stuff like that. And then, we went from that to, the bad news bears, the D team, the C team, the B team. And now we're at a point where we have A-level talent and we're trying to do a lot of the stuff that Mark just mentioned. We're trying to get everyone in alignment. And it never in a million years did I think it would take 9.5 years to get to this point. It's so much work to get, and especially in my industries, it's hyper competitive. And I'm sure in many other industries it's the same, but in this industry, there's a lot of people who are willing to jeopardize their integrity to make a buck. So building that team that is fully aligned with everything that Mark just mentioned is hard to begin with. But then, the one of the things he mentioned is trust, right? Because without trust, you're nothing. And again, kind of looping back to what we've already touched on, patience. And good, when something bad happens, say good, that's an opportunity to learn. And then as far as the books go, the last one here that I had on the list, I know you mentioned the yoga book earlier, which is a little bit more self-explanatory than these other books that we're touching on. As far as Uncommon, your most recent book goes, I've read that one too. And one of the big things I picked up in that one is recapitulation. And you touched on a lot of other good things in that book. What, in your opinion, is your favorite part or lessons from that book?
Well, I look at Uncommon really as a adjunct or a sequel to Unbeatable Mind. It's actually organized into 5 sections. Each one of them is one of the 5 mountains. And I wanted to go much deeper on some of the developmental practices for especially emotions, emotional mountain, intuitional mountain, and Kokoro, or the spiritual mountain. So I didn't really have an opportunity to go that deep in the book, Unveil Mind or The Way of the Seal. Especially in the emotional mountain, I think, like you referenced recapitulation, I introduced some different meditative practices that can be really useful for gaining awareness of what's driving your behaviors, right? And for actually releasing some of that energy, right? Staring down that fear wolf. Like, how do you do it? And also, the recapitulation is important because it's part of your daily practices in terms of making sure that you don't leave any stone unturned and that you learn everything you need to learn, and you also release everything you're supposed to release, right? Whatever you're supposed to surrender, you surrender. So the morning ritual I talked about, when you wake up, you got your meditation practice. So you want to have a breathing, meditative, journaling, reflection, mindfulness, visualization practice in the morning. That's winning in your mind before you step foot in the battlefield. And then the evening ritual, you want to have a different practice that is retrospective. It's kind of like the SEAL debrief. You look at the day as a mission or an op's done, you're back. And now you go to some, quiet space, and this could be after dinner or even before you enter the home. Say you just park somewhere. You could then, of course, then you don't get to recapitulate the evening, right? So if you miss it. So I prefer to do it kind of like after dinner, and just go into the bathroom. It doesn't take long. Evening ritual should only take 4 or 5 minutes. So it's a retrospective visualization. You go back in your mind and you relive the day from the moment you wake up. And you can go fast, but what you're looking for are the highs and the lows. You're looking for what worked, what went really well, and you want to note it and see if there's anything that caused it. Oh yeah, man, that went really well because I had great sleep. Why did I have great sleep? Because I didn't drink anything, I didn't eat anything for 2 hours before bed, blah, blah, blah. Great, I'm going to keep doing more of that. And then what didn't go well? And you look at what didn't go well and you say, why didn't it go well? And what did I learn? And oftentimes it's what didn't go well where you find an opportunity to clean something up because maybe you said something insensitive or you missed an opportunity. And so now you can do that right now, or you make a note to do it in the morning. So it's a great way to eradicate potential regrets and keep regrets from building up, which then over time corrode relationships. Furthermore, it's an opportunity, to look at the things that went well and realize, wow, you had a lot of help in that. And to offer a little, gratitude. Spread the love, right? Begin to practice this idea that we're not the only architects of our lives, that we have a lot of support and help and mentors and people who are rooting for us, and some people who are just inadvertently helping us out. And if you have the opportunity to thank them or to show your appreciation for them, then it's only going to grow your ability to appreciate everything. Whatever you do to people, you leave a carbon copy on yourself. So if you judge someone, you're judging yourself. If you appreciate someone, you're appreciating yourself. So this practice really is one about extreme accountability for how you use your mind. And the morning and evening ritual are essentially like two bookends to make sure that the day, which is the only day you have, because yesterday is gone and tomorrow is a hope, that this day is the best. You have the best potential to squeeze the most nectar out of it, both in terms of the goodness and the appreciation and letting go of shit and learning and growing.
Absolutely.
That's what Uncommon is all about. I probably got a few more books in me. I'm working on one with a co-author. Helps run my sheepdog training, which is like situational awareness and how to be strong in a crisis. Instead of pulling out your phone and filming an accident, you're there rendering assistance, or like first-person shooter, you handle yourself. Anyway, so it's called situational intelligence. That's going to be more on the training the mind for being prepared for anything. That might be the next. I'm working on a sheepdog kind of manifesto. Also with this guy, I want to put out a book about the 5 plateaus, which you're aware of from the Unbeatable Mind. These are the stages of development, right? Survivor, protector, achiever, equalizer, integrator. I think that would be a phenomenal book. Just trying to like get my business situated so that I can breathe a little bit deeper and take the time to reactivate my writing muscle again.
So as far as no surrender goes, can you tell us about a standout low point in your life? Whether it's military, business, personal, or something else.
Oh man, I mean, I don't know. You probably have the same feeling, but if someone else looks at my life, it looks like I've had all these huge successes. But every single thing that I've done had some disaster built into it. I referenced earlier the Coronado Brewing Company. That was super painful. Like blew up. I walked away from what is now probably a $50 million business because it got so toxic with my partners, who were my brothers-in-law. And these guys, were just plain old mean to my wife and I, and also to my wife's father, my father-in-law, who was a former Marine and was supporting me. And I'm trying to like grow shareholder value and do the right thing. And these guys, like, I just shouldn't have been in business with them. They didn't share any of my values. And it turned into a big pissing match, proxy battles for control of the company for 3 years. And I was winning them all. But they went after my wife and my stepdaughters and my father-in-law personally, to the point where my father-in-law got divorced. His wife left him because he wouldn't support, his sons in this battle. It crushed him. It like broke his heart. And so Sandy kind of begged me, my wife begged me to walk away. And I didn't just walk away, but I did orchestrate a buyout for myself and my friends and family who were invested. And they got a small return, but it was so painful. And I mentioned earlier that I had kind of, because of the drama and this kind of newness of the environment, I'd gotten away from there's one time in my life where I'd gotten away from kind of my daily practices, and I suffered because of it. And there's a lot of things that I would do differently in retrospect, but these things happen to wake you up, right? And it propelled me out of Coronado. We moved north up into North County, San Diego, found an incredible place that we still live, in the community today on the ocean. And I launched NavySeals.com out of that experience, which then turned into SealFit. So again, had I not had that breakdown and that fight and that food fight, I maybe still be in the beer business, maybe still drinking too much. It led to a whole nother breakdown, right? So similar thing after I left Iraq. My initial foray in with SealFit, I wasn't calling it SealFit at the time, was on a government contract to mentor Navy SEALs nationwide. I got hired by the recruiting command. Well, because this billion-dollar company called Blackwater also wanted that contract and didn't win it or earn it, they went to town to try to discredit the prime contractor that hired me, and they succeeded, and the whole contract got basically ripped out from under us. We were already fulfilling the contract. It was like $10 million 6-year contract, $10 million a year. And I invested a lot in hiring like 30 some odd Navy SEALs to put them in recruiting districts around the world, around the country. Visit every one of those recruiting districts. We set up an incredible system, huge success. And then a year later, Blackwater Eric Prince's company basically stole it from us. And that was a huge blow to my ego. It's like, whoa, and I was like, I looked at that and I said, holy shit. People are saying you got to fight them. It was fraud, right? They did a bait and switch on us. Um, but it would be like a minnow fighting a shark, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back to my meditation bench and I thought about it for days. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to fight that. I didn't belong in government contracting. So this is a blessing in disguise. I want to have thousands of clients instead of one government client who dictates my every move. And so out of those ashes rose the phoenix of SealFit. So I can look at everything that was a disaster and be very grateful for it, because out of those disasters, it was like emptying the cup. It cleared the ground for something new that was trying to emerge.
Wow. Yeah. And as we've already touched on, and a lot of the other things we've already discussed, Mark's got a ton of coping mechanisms and really more than coping, rejuvenation, healing, forward thinking type things that he uses. When you were at those lowest points, like there was your routines and your meditation, is there anything else specifically that you recommend?
You've got to go back to the basics. You've got to rely on the basics. And so you also have to train the basics. So my go-to when I'm in a crisis is to go back to the basics and to double down on your practice. Double down on the time that you spend in meditation, contemplation, journaling, reflecting, exercising, yoga. Like you said, it's got to be non-negotiable, because that's where what's emerging is emerging from within, right? It's coming from within, and so you got to slow down and go back in and tap in order to allow it to merge, come out faster, and also to not be distorted with your ego or fear. So going back to the basics physically, getting good sleep, eating well, hydrating, exercising, meditating, right? All of those things, and then being patient. So a lot of times we're so uncomfortable that we want to then take action to relieve that discomfort, and you end up taking action that ends up having to be unwound or is not the right action. So to be patient, observe, orient, decide, then act. The OODA loop.
Definitely. And then last couple quick, kind of more quick fire questions here. Your morning routine, how does that shake out in the morning for you?
Wake up. Practice starts the moment you wake up. So the moment I wake up, when I regain kind of conscious awareness, I'm curating the quality of my thoughts with my mantras and positive thinking and gratitude. Then go have some water, use the restroom, drink some fresh water to recharge the battery. And then I get into contemplation and journaling for a while. And then I go into my box breathing, meditation, visualization practice. And I do it with my wife, right? A couple that trains together, stays together. And then make a really robust smoothie. And then we head down to a different house that we have in Encinitas, where I've got my pull-up rig and my whole setup and yoga studio. And so then I do yoga every day with my wife. Then we do a high intensity interval training with some weights. Then I take a sauna and a cold plunge. That's my morning ritual. It's good for inflammation, obviously, as well as strengthening your immune system and clearing your mind. Yeah,
Absolutely.
stuff.
I know you don't drink much alcohol, maybe a little bit of wine here and there. You don't eat for pleasure. We've touched on a lot of things that, make you happy, but, and the whole kind of life approach, our balanced life approach that kind of culminates with all the stuff we've already touched on. But is that where you find your happiness is in this, over your multiple decades on this planet, just refining your daily routine to the point where you're happy most of the time because you're just in like on the right wavelength? Or is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about staying as happy as possible?
We have to distinguish between pleasure and happiness. I do find pleasure in having a glass of wine at sunset with my wife, or two. I do find pleasure in eating a great steak or even a pizza once in a while. I'm not a foodie though, where I'm addicted to food. So I put it in its proper place. It's enjoyable. It's necessary for sustenance. So I eat high quality food, no more than I need. So I don't overeat. I eat a lot less than a lot of people do, actually, because I've trained myself not to need it. And so, but occasionally, food brings pleasure, and these other things bring pleasure. But that doesn't affect my state of happiness. My experience is that happiness is my/one's natural state. But we cover it up, right? We hide it from ourselves. So the practices that we described here of going within and learning to sit in stillness and to evoke the experience of this unity consciousness or this oneness or this everythingness experience naturally brings one to the experience of happiness beyond pain and pleasure. You could have pain in your life and it's not going to affect your happiness. You can have suffering or experience the suffering of others and it's not going to affect your happiness, because happiness is your natural state. Just like ultimately peace is your natural state. That's what we're working toward here, to be stable and grounded in happiness and peace regardless of what's going on outside or inside. What I found is that these practices have led to, or will continue to lead to, a more pleasant quality of life. But just like when I smacked a tree going 40 miles an hour and shattered my scapula in February and broke 8 ribs and had internal damage, I mean, that's a pretty shitty situation, but it didn't affect my happiness. In fact, I was happier after that because I was like, wow, I just got a second chance. I came really close to like checking out. Don't pin your happiness on food or alcohol or drugs or your pet or whatever. Just be happiness.
Couldn't really think of a better way to end it than that. I've been talking for about 2.5 hours now, and for me, it's gone by relatively quickly, and I'm hoping it goes the same for everyone that views the episode. And I really, really appreciate your time. And again, not just now, but all the time you spent serving our country and then writing your books and creating all this other great content. By the way, I recommend you go to Mark's website, unbeatablemind.com, and sign up for his newsletters. Ironically, the newsletter today touched on fear and courage. And I had this quote here: everything I want is on the other side of fear. Pretty famous quote. It's really awesome, that everything you've done and all the lives you've affected in positive ways. And hopefully we can do this again sometime and follow up, because we're going to give our viewers the opportunity to ask questions if we have guests come on, a second or third time. So again, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Justin. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it, brother. Take care.